Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the latest episode of Late Night Hockey. My name is Steven Psihogios, and I'm very pleased today to be joined by Michael Amato from Goalie Post. He does it all there, writer, editor, manager, part of Dauber Hockey. So great to have Michael on the show today to pick his mind and talk about some goaltending situations in the NHL. Michael, thank you so much for joining the show.
No problem, Steven. Thanks for having me.
And before we get into the analysis, I want to talk about you a little bit and your career in sport media. So, like I said, works for Goalie Post right now, manager, editor, writer. But how has your career and your path in sport media led you to where you are now?
Well, it's been a bit of an interesting journey. I started off taking sort of sport management in college, and then from there, I just transitioned to freelance writing when I graduated. I was doing an administrative role in sports, and I really felt like I wanted to get into the writing aspect. So I started freelancing, and then eventually I got an internship at the Hockey News, and from there I transitioned to Dauber for a while, and I did some stuff for like Puck Daddy and different freelance opportunities before I ended up at the Score for 5 years doing it full time. And then about 3 years ago, I left that to do more of a regular 9 to 5, still writing and editing, but just for an insurance company. And when I left the Score, I just went back to Dauber and started working with Goalie Post again on the side. So yeah, it's been really good. And I'm, between COVID and I was on pat leave earlier this year, I got a chance to really get back into more writing and editing, which has been a really good experience.
Awesome. Yeah. And if you follow Michael, you know, he puts out great work over at Goalie Post, always up to date, always willing to answer your goalie questions too. So just great all around work from Michael. And now we're going to dig into the goalie, I guess, situations around the NHL right now that have definitely made the news over these last few weeks or so. And we're going to start off with the Boston Bruins. They have Tuukka Rask go down with an injury. You have Yaroslav Halak be placed on the COVID-19 list. And this team doesn't skip a beat between the pipes. They've got two young goaltenders in Jeremy Swayman and Dan Vladar, who have been excellent so far. Limited experience, but they've been solid for the Boston Bruins. What have you made of both goaltenders, and which of those two has actually impressed you the most?
Well, it's definitely nice if you're Boston to have that type of goaltending depth. To just pull two guys that are really inexperienced and to basically not miss a beat, like you said. But yeah, I like them both. I think Swayman is probably the better prospect long term. Like he looks really sharp. He's had a bit of a better pedigree, throughout college and in the AHL. I know he's only played, I think, 9 AHL games, and I think he's starting today. Is going to be his third NHL game. But he's looked super sharp. It's going to be really interesting, I think, to see what the Bruins do because both Rask and Halak are UFAs after this season. Both are in their mid-30s. So, with the team, I think maybe looking to create some cap space. Is it possible they just roll with Swayman and Vladar next year and move on from both? Or do they bring maybe Rask back for a short-term deal and pair him with Swayman? So it's going to be hard to tell what they're going to do in the offseason. But right now, it looks pretty good that they have those guys available to them, especially when you can use those young guys that aren't making much money. It can really help you with your cap space.
Yeah, and Swayman's a great story because his breakout was last year. Really, it seemed like Vladar was going to be kind of the heir to the goaltending situation in Boston once Rask and Halak sorted themselves out. But as you mentioned, Swayman has definitely come on, and it seems like the more interesting prospect after a really solid year at UMaine last year, and he's been solid for the Providence Bruins as well. So Boston's got some interesting situation going ahead with the goaltenders. We'll switch gears now to the St. Louis Blues. And this is a team that they have an established number one goalie in Jordan Binnington, but he was floundering for a decent portion of the season. In over his last 4 starts now, he has posted a .920 save percentage or better. So it does seem like Binnington is starting to figure it out a bit. Do you think he's fully back on track with the Blues and he can vault them back into a playoff spot in the West? Or do you see some struggles still plaguing Binnington and the Blues down the stretch?
Yeah, I think if you look at Binnington since he went on that incredible cup run, he's been pretty average. And I think a lot of people got caught up in that sort of second half of the season when he debuted, or not debuted for the Blues, but they sort of turned over the full-time job to him. And then, he went through the playoffs and basically led them to the cup. I think everyone kind of got caught up and felt like, wow, this guy's going to be the goalie here of the future. And at the end of the day, it was a pretty small sample size. And I think, last year he kind of took a pretty big step back in the playoff bubble. He was not good at all. So I'm not like super surprised that he's had a pretty rough stretch this year. Yeah, I think he's probably pretty close to more like a 9-10 save percentage goalie overall than he was, more like the 9, I think 25, 27 he was in the playoffs for the Blues when they won the cup. I think that's probably what you're gonna see with him. I guess the challenge for St. Louis is, yeah, they gave him that big contract and they don't really have a ton of depth behind him right now. Husso, he might, turn out to be a decent option, but right now he's really inexperienced and he's just not good enough, I think, to kind of give Binnington the time off that he needs. If you look at some other teams that have struggled with their starters, like Carey Price, as an example, had some struggles earlier this year. They were able to turn to Jake Allen, who ironically was with the Blues, and they let him go. And, the Blues don't have that luxury. So they basically have to let, Binnington just play through it. And yeah, it's going to be a challenge when you sign a goalie like that. It's a pretty big deal, 6x6, like they're going to have to go with him, for the foreseeable future. I mean, they might have to look in maybe this offseason, they look into maybe upgrading the backup position to give him a little bit of more insulation if he has some struggles. But yeah, I think like, I don't see him kind of, being fully past his struggles. I think he's always going to kind of be up and down. I don't feel like he's like an elite goalie like some of the others are in the league. I think with that team, and the Blues, I think the Blues haven't played as well as they did the past 2 years as well. Plus they're minus Peter Angelo this season, which I think really impacts your starting goalie. He's your best defenseman that you lost. So I think overall, to expect him to get back to the level he was in the playoffs is probably unrealistic. But I think hopefully, for Blues fans, he stabilizes himself a bit and can just at least help them get into the playoffs.
Yeah, you mentioned the loss of Pietrangelo, but not only that, you have Colton Parayko miss a large chunk of the season too. And I know they bring in Torrey Krug, but that's not really Krug's MO, right? Playing strong defensive hockey. They brought him in to supplement on the power play and to drive offensive production from the back end. So I think, like you said, missing Allen, no Pietrangelo, and also having Parayko out for a lot of this year it's been a culmination of things that kind of led to a tailspin. So, well, interesting to see now he's strung 4 solid appearances together. We'll see if maybe that can turn around. But like you said, I think more of the same is coming too, where you're going to get hot stretches met with cold stretches when it comes to Jordan Binnington. And next, I want to talk about, I think this is the most interesting goalie situation around the league right now, and that's the Carolina Hurricanes. You have Peter Mrazek come back after suffering a thumb injury, 2 solid performances. He's had 6 starts this year. He's got a shutout in 3 of those. So he's been rock solid when healthy. But you also have Alex Nedeljkovic, who did more than hold down the fort while Mrazek was out. And now if you're Carolina, you've got 2 goalies playing really well, not to mention James Reimer, who hasn't been terrible. But I think there's maybe something in the works. We've heard potentially a trade involving James Reimer as the deadline nears. So he might not be in the cards for the foreseeable future when it comes to Carolina. But it's really these 2 goalies I want to focus, Nedeljkovic and Mrazek. What have you made of that Carolina situation so far? And do you think this is a true 50-50 split the rest of the season?
I think it will definitely be more of a tandem. I think, a lot of people have been asking me online if they should get rid of Nedeljkovic from their fantasy team, and I've been recommending that they should keep him if they can. I do think, Carolina's probably going to go in the way of sort of the Islanders model, where they use both goalies quite frequently, because Carolina's a really strong team. Like Mrazek is a solid goalie. I think Nedeljkovic is as well. I think they can pair those guys together and not kind of overtax anybody down the stretch and just keep them both fresh for the playoffs. As you mentioned, Reimer, I do think they're going to try and probably do something before the deadline if they can. I would look at a team like Colorado maybe for Reimer, who needs probably a better backup for Grubauer. That Frank Hughes is hurt. I know they already added Johansson, but I don't feel like he's probably the guy that they want ideally. I think Reimer would be a perfect fit there. I guess it would just come down to his cap hit and if Carolina can eat some money or how that's going to go. But yeah, or they could try and waive him. I don't know if anyone's going to pick him up. But yeah, I do think Mrazek and Nedeljkovic are going to be a good pairing down the stretch. I don't know about 100%, I don't know about 50-50 bang on, but I think it's going to be fairly close. Like maybe Nedeljkovic plays 1 game a week, Mrazek 2 type thing. Because even if you look at last year, like Mrazek, I guess, was the guy, but they still played Reimer quite a bit. It wasn't like Mrazek played 75% of the game. So Brindamore definitely likes to rotate guys. And yeah, if they don't manage to get rid of Reimer, I wouldn't be shocked if Reimer got like a start or two down the stretch, or at least dressed as the backup to give one of the other guys like a complete night off. We've seen teams do that this year just because the schedule is so condensed. But yeah, I think that's probably what they'll do. I think in their ideal world, Mrazek would start game one of the playoffs, but I think to get there, they'll probably use both guys because they can win with them both, and they're both pretty capable, and it just keeps both of them fresh.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question. Who gets game one of the playoffs? You say Mrazek. I think that's still, if at this point, I would lean Nedeljkovic just because he's put a little bit larger of a body of work out there. And we've seen this from Mrazek from time to time where he has really nice hot stretches. But then you get points, like you look at last year even, Brindamore really had to flip-flop between Reimer and Mrazek in the playoffs and the regular season. So I don't know if I'm ready to give Mrazek that full vote of confidence where Nedeljkovic, he doesn't really have that same body of work where you can say, well, we've seen him get hot, we've seen him get cold. It's definitely a shorter body of work. So interesting you say Mrazek because I say Nedeljkovic, but Brandamore's
It
got a
wouldn't
lot of time to figure it out.
it wouldn't shock me if it was Nedeljkovic. I just basically look at Mrazek's started, I think, 2 of the 3 games since he's returned, ahead of Nedeljkovic. And yeah, like I think they have both guys. Maybe just because Mrazek has a little bit more experience, they give him that start, considering they're both kind of interchangeable. But yeah, as you mentioned, there's still, a handful of games to go here in the next few weeks. And that's going to tell a lot. If Mrazek stumbles a bit and Nedeljkovic keeps going the way he's been going, yeah, he could easily get the start as well.
Yeah, that's definitely, I think, one of the more interesting storylines because you have the Hurricanes, this team that is definitely in a Stanley Cup contention window right now, still trying to sort out who's going to get the start game one of the playoffs. So I think that's a very interesting storyline to follow. And this one, for all the opposite reasons, has been an interesting storyline to follow. It's been a train wreck, like it has been really through this franchise's history, and that's the Philadelphia Flyers and their goaltending situation. It looked like they finally had someone entering this year. Carter Hart, a respectable .915 save percentage through his first 2 seasons, really seemed like he was going to be the answer to all of Philly's long-term goaltending issues that they've had. Like I said, really, it's in the DNA of this franchise is that they haven't been able to find someone ever since Bernie Parent, Ron Hextall days. And this year it fell apart. Carter Hart was someone, we play fantasy. He was going early in fantasy drafts, maybe the biggest bust at the goalie position this year. What happened with Carter Hart, and what do you see his career looking like down the road? Because this year has really changed a lot of people's opinions on Carter Hart.
Yeah, he's definitely been probably the biggest disappointment in net, in fantasy hockey circles anyway. But yeah, definitely for the Flyers as well. It just hasn't really gone great this year. I think they just hit a skid after that Lake Tahoe game. They've really just gone downhill, and his numbers have really sort of cratered off. And it's hard to say. Like, I think people forget he's been kind of like a prodigy, but if you look at his numbers, like he hasn't even played 100 NHL games yet. He's still 22. It could just be a little stretch he's going through as a young goalie. I think goaltending is one of the most challenging sort of positions to figure out. There's very few guys that just have like a 10-year number one goalie, unquestioned starter type career. A lot of guys go up and down, and we see a lot of tandems now, and it's very hard to find that one goalie that, okay, you can just rely on for, 65, 70% of the games. I think Hart, this year, I think the Flyers haven't played as well as they did last year. Overall, I think that's part of the problem. If you look at those 2 games that they just got shelled against the Rangers where they give up, I think, 8 goals and 9 goals in 2 games. Like, a lot of those goals were not like floaters from the point. They were just bang, bang passing plays where, Hart was kind of left out to dry. But also, if you notice, like Brian Elliott was playing really well at the beginning of the year. And then the same time Hart started to fall off, he sort of went with him. And I think that has a lot to do with just how the Flyers are playing as well. So I wouldn't be super worried about the future for Hart. I just think it's a bit of a tough go this year. It's also just a really different year, right? Like, there was no training camp, really, like no exhibition games. It would just kind of get out there and play. It's a shortened season. It's condensed. A lot of games canceled. A lot of games postponed. So when you're kind of evaluating someone's future or their career, I wouldn't put like a ton of stock into this year. I mean, it obviously means something, but at the same time, like it's been a really wacky year in that sense. And maybe they need to view him more as like, he's not quite there yet as a number one goalie in the sense that, hey, you can go to him like 9 out of 10 times. Maybe they need to upgrade Elliott a little bit to give him more of like a 1A guy that can push him a little bit more. I know Elliott's played well there at times, but I mean, he's 37. Like they maybe can bring in somebody younger that can just help him out a bit. But yeah, overall, I think Philly's probably going to be a team in the offseason that really changes their roster. I look at them and Calgary as two teams that really kind of are getting stale and they need to really do some stuff. So I think if that happens, and maybe they can improve the defense a little bit. I mean, they also lost Matt Niskanen, which I think is an underrated loss for that team. I think he was really good defensively for them. So, yeah, like I said, I wouldn't panic long term about Hart, but yeah, it's definitely this year. I don't think it's going to end well for him, but hopefully he can rebound and bounce back next year.
You mentioned potentially upgrading on Elliott. Someone who I think kind of makes sense is Jonathan Bernier, who we've seen play really well in maybe the worst of situations with the Detroit Red Wings. He's maintained pretty solid numbers. He's just getting back from an injury now, but he has been able to show at least, he's not as advanced in age as Brian Elliott is. He's still younger. He seems like he still has, some prime years ahead of him. Maybe that's a move the Flyers or someone in that realm the Flyers look at to potentially pair with Hart. Because I think you're right. I think asking a young goaltender to really go out and be the guy is a little unfair on the goalie. But there is one stat, and I want to run this by you because I've been tracking this stat for a little while, and it was jarring. So last year, Carter Hart's home road splits, he had a .948 save percentage at home, but that dropped to .857 on the road. So pretty stark contrast when you look at those numbers. Do you think that maybe this is someone who, I don't know, like that an .857 road percentage during the 2019-20 season, it's pretty rough. Do you think that maybe not having the Philly faithful, I know he played all right during the bubble, but do you think that maybe just not having that home crowd behind him, do you think this is someone who maybe feeds off of that? I don't know if there's anything to that, but you look at that number, then you look at his struggles all year long this year, and it's jarring, right? So I don't know if maybe it's a tough
possible
situation, right?
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I think there's probably a lot of guys that are impacted by that for sure, like the lack of fans, like at all positions, right? I think just kind of getting up for those certain moments in the game, and especially when you get to this point in the season where it's kind of dragging on, you're playing a ton of games, you don't get that like extra boost from the fans that you would normally get. So yeah, it's possible. I mean, I think like home roads splits are really tough. It just depends on the situation. Yeah, like that's probably the main difference this year, that you don't have fans in the stands. But yeah, and I think road situation is always going to be tougher for a goalie because you don't have the last change. You can't get your matchups as well as you would at home. So yeah, it's definitely something to consider. And if you're looking at stuff like that, especially in fantasy hockey, that's a good note to keep an eye on.
For sure. So yeah, just an interesting tidbit because the road numbers have stayed the same this year. It's just the home numbers, a massive drop. He's nowhere near that .948 save percentage at home. So the last team I want to talk about here is the Toronto Maple Leafs and their goaltending situation right now. You look at Frederik Andersen, wasn't playing great before he left. Who knows if potentially the injury was lingering or bothering him while he was playing. But for his standards, below average, .897 save percentage this season. But you have Jack Campbell, who's this enigma. Everyone on this team loves Jack Campbell. He's 10-0-0, undefeated. You really can't ask for much more out of Campbell. But this kind of puts the Leafs at an interesting crossroads. We've heard that this is their year to go all in, to make a big push. And ultimately, you want to have the best goaltender between the pipes. Has Jack Campbell done enough, in your mind, Mike, to deserve and earn the number one starter's position for this Maple Leafs team come playoff time, if both are healthy?
I think right now, today as we speak, yes, absolutely. I think Campbell, like if the Leafs are playing game one of a playoff series tomorrow, I think Campbell should start, unquestionably. Like you mentioned, it's an all-in season for Toronto. So, Kyle Dubas has talked about, hey, I'm willing to trade a top prospect. I'm willing to trade a number one pick for someone to improve this team. If you're going to do that, you've got to put the best goalie in the net. And right now it's Campbell. And, even before Anderson got hurt, he was struggling a bit. And I think it's hard for people in this market because Anderson has been the number one guy for so long. And, the backups have been bad for so long, from Garrett Sparks to Michael Hutchison. It was always, if Anderson's healthy, he plays. If it's not a back-to-back, he plays. So I think now that you have another good goalie around, I think people have a hard time kind of accepting that in a sense. But, and I think Campbell, everyone says, oh, it's only a small sample size. Well, the Stanley Cup playoffs are a small sample size. Like we talked about Jordan Binnington earlier,
Yeah.
Who just took the Blues on a run to the Cup. Who's to say Campbell can't do the same? And that doesn't mean, Jack Campbell is going to be the starter for this team for the next 5 years, or he's good enough to be the starter, long-term for this team. But, right now in an all-in season, there's only a few weeks left of the playoffs. He's your best guy. He's rolling. He's 10-0. There's a good chance that, he can carry that momentum into the playoffs. And if he can just play well enough for a few months, it's going to give you a really good shot to win. And, like you mentioned too, the health I think is a big factor. I think he's struggled, to kind of play consecutive games for a while. It looks like he's starting to get healthy again 100%. And if he is, yeah, I think there should be no question about it. I mean, at the end of the day, look, Frederik Andersen was the best goalie, the best option for this team for a long time. 2 years ago he was, 3 years ago he was, last year he probably was, but right now he's not. And that doesn't mean that, he might not play a role down the stretch. If he gets back and he gets healthy and Campbell does falter, hey, that's a great option to go to, in a playoff series. If you have no other options, like Anderson there as a backup is a great option. So.
Yeah, and I think so much we get caught up in like the legacy versus the right now. But you got to go with the guy who's putting it forward and getting it done. We saw Anton Khudobin last year for Dallas. Obviously,
Yeah.
Bishop was dealing with injuries, but he's an example. You remember Yaroslav Halak during Montreal's run of quite a few years ago now. But
Yeah.
it's all about getting hot at the right time in the Stanley Cup Finals. The regular season is such a marathon compared to what the playoffs are. Like you said, it's such a small sample size. You just need someone who's hot at the moment, because goaltenders, they fluctuate, hot and cold, hot and cold. So just getting the right guy in the right place at the right time, that's what it seems like it is with Jack Campbell right now. So I agree 100%. I think if the playoffs start tomorrow, there's no reason why the Maple Leafs shouldn't go with Campbell. And that's going to do it for this episode of Late Night Hockey. Michael, thank you so much for joining the show. Where can people go and find your work? Because you've got excellent work. Just let them know where they can go find it.
Yeah, so goaliepost.com, or you can follow us on Twitter at goaliepost, or follow me at Amato_Mike.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining the show, Mike. Appreciate it. Have a good one. Everyone, thank you for tuning in.
Thanks for having me.